A woman at my job tried to bully me. She didn't know I wrote the playbook of being a bully. I'm not proud of who I was in high school. I need to say that first because the rest of this story only works if you understand that I know exactly what I did. I was mean. Not the quiet kind where you whisper behind someone's back. The loud kind where I walked into a room and people moved. I picked targets and took them apart slowly, and I was good at it. I knew how to find the one thing a person was insecure about and use it in front of just enough people to make it stick. I made a girl named Alma cry every day for 2 months in 9th grade because I thought it was funny. I got a boy named Ruben to eat lunch in a bathroom stall for a semester because I told everyone he smelled. I did things that still make my stomach turn. I was the worst version of a person, and I did it all with a smile. Something changed junior year. A school counselor pulled me in and showed me a letter Alma's mother had written to the school. It described what her daughter was going through at home because of what was happening at school. Alma had stopped eating. She was having nightmares. She told her mother she didn't want to be alive anymore. The counselor read me that letter and something cracked open inside me that is never fully closed. I stopped that day. I apologized to Alma in person, and she flinched when I walked up to her, and that flinch taught me more about who I had been than anything anyone ever said to me. I spent the rest of high school trying to undo damage I knew I couldn't fully undo. I went to college and studied social work. I volunteered with youth programs focused on bullying prevention. I became the person I should have been from the start. By 25, I had spent 7 years unlearning every instinct that made me dangerous. I worked at a community outreach office handling case files and coordinating with schools and families. I was patient, and I listened, and I treated everyone with the respect I should have given Alma and Ruben and every other person I hurt. Then I got transferred to a new office and met Dina. Dina had been there for 3 years and acted like she owned the place. She had 2 women who followed her around and laughed at everything she said, and she ran that office the same way I used to run a hallway. The first day I walked in, she looked me up and down and said, "Oh, you're the transfer." She said it in a tone that made the words sound like something she scraped off her shoe. I smiled and said, "Nice to meet you." She turned around and walked away. The first week she excluded me from a team lunch and said she didn't think I'd be interested. The second week she moved my things from my assigned desk to a smaller one near the storage room and told our supervisor she thought I'd have more space there. The third week she started making comments about my work in front of people. She'd say things like, "I'm surprised that's how you formatted the file," or "Interesting approach. I've never seen anyone do it that way." Always with a smile, always loud enough for others to hear, always framed as helpful so nobody could call it what it was. I recognized every single move because I invented half of them. The exclusion, the relocation, the public undermining disguised as concern, the building of a loyal group to isolate the target. Dina was running a playbook I could have written with my eyes closed at 15. The difference was, I was 15 when I did it, and Dina was 32 doing it in a professional office with a lanyard around her neck. I didn't react for the first month. I watched. I let her do everything because I needed to understand her pattern before I moved. Old me would have gone straight for the throat. New me knew the best way to dismantle someone like Dina wasn't to fight her. It was to make her irrelevant. I started with the people around her, not by talking about her. I never said a single negative word about Dina to anyone. I just started being good to the people she controlled. Her 2 friends Willa and June were not bad people. They followed Dina because she was the loudest voice and nobody had given them a reason to listen to anyone else. I started eating lunch with Willa once or twice a week. I asked about her kids and remembered what she told me. I helped June with a filing system she had been struggling with for weeks because Dina told her to figure it out herself. I stayed late to help our supervisor with a presentation and made sure the whole team got credit. I didn't try to replace Dina. I just existed as a person who was kind and consistent, and I let the contrast do the work. Within 6 weeks, Willa sat with me at lunch more than she sat with Dina. June started asking me questions instead of going to Dina. Other people started coming to my desk for help because I actually helped them instead of making them feel stupid for asking. Dina noticed and ramped up. She started going after my work directly. She CC'd our supervisor on an email pointing out a minor formatting error in one of my reports. Not a mistake that affected anything. A margin that was a 1/4 inch off from the template. She wrote it like she was doing me a favor. Just wanted to flag this so it doesn't happen again. Thought it was worth mentioning since we want to maintain consistency across the team. Our supervisor Lorraine replied and said thanks for flagging and moved on. Dina took that as validation. The next week she found another small thing. A date I'd written as April 3rd instead of April 3rd. She sent it to the whole team this time. Just a friendly reminder that we use numerical date formats in all official correspondence. She didn't mention my name, but she replied to my email thread so everyone knew who she was correcting. I didn't respond. Not because I was being strategic, because I genuinely didn't care. I had spent years learning that the only power people like Dina have is the power you hand them by reacting. If you don't flinch, they have nothing to work with, and I don't flinch anymore. I learned that from Alma. Dina's next move was predictable because it was the same thing I would have done at 15. She went for my reputation with the supervisor. She started volunteering for high visibility projects, and then subtly pointing out that I wasn't contributing to them. She'd say things in meetings like, "I know we're all busy, but some of us have been carrying a heavier load lately." She never said my name. She didn't need to. The implication was enough. She started scheduling informal check-ins with Lorraine where she'd bring up team dynamics and express concern about whether the newer members were pulling their weight. I knew this because Willa told me. Willa had overheard Dina on the phone with Lorraine through the break room wall and came to my desk afterward looking uncomfortable. She said, "I don't want to start anything, but I think you should know what's being said." I thanked her and told her not to worry. Willa looked surprised. She said, "Aren't you going to do something?" I said, "I'm going to keep doing my job. That's the something." Here's what Dina didn't understand. I had studied people like her professionally for 7 years. I ran workshops in schools about exactly this behavior. I could identify the cycle she was in better than she could. Dina wasn't bullying me because she hated me. She was bullying me because I threatened something she needed. She needed to be the most important person in that office. She needed people to come to her. She needed the hierarchy she built because without it, she didn't know where she stood. I was dismantling that hierarchy just by being decent, and it was making her spiral. The harder she pushed, the more desperate she looked, and the more desperate she looked, the more people quietly moved away from her. That's the thing about bullies in professional spaces. In school, you can get away with it because the social structure protects you. In an office, there are records, there are emails, there are witnesses, and there are supervisors who eventually start paying paying attention when the patterns become impossible to ignore. The turning point came 3 months after I started. Our office had a quarterly review where each team member presented their caseload progress and outcomes. It was informal, but Lorraine used it to evaluate how people were performing. Dina always went first. She presented her numbers with confidence and made sure to reference how much she'd taken on for the team. She was good at that part, making her work sound bigger than it was. When it was my turn, I presented my numbers plainly. I didn't add spin. I didn't compare myself to anyone. I didn't preface it with how busy I'd been or how much extra I'd taken on. I just showed the data. I had handled 22 more cases than the quarter before. My resolution rate was the highest on the team at 89%. 3 families I'd worked with had sent written feedback to the office thanking me by name. One letter was from a mother whose custody situation I'd helped navigate over 6 weeks of calls and home visits. She wrote that I was the first person at any agency who made her feel like she wasn't being judged. I hadn't asked for the feedback. I didn't know the letters existed until Lorraine read excerpts from them during my portion of the review. They sent them on their own. Lorraine looked at the numbers and then looked at me and said, "This is excellent work." She said it simply, the way you say something that doesn't need embellishment because the facts are already loud enough. Dina's jaw tightened. I could see it from across the table. She waited until Lorraine moved on to the next person, and then leaned over to June and whispered something. June didn't laugh. She just looked down at her hands. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not because I had won anything, but because June chose not to participate, and that meant Dina's audience was shrinking. After the review, Dina tried something new. She went personal. She cornered me in the break room when no one else was there and said, "You think you're better than me, don't you?" I poured my coffee and said no. She said, "You've been here 3 months and you act like you run this place." I said, "I don't act like anything. I just do my work." She stepped closer and said, "I've been here for 3 years. I built this team. You don't get to walk in and take what I built." I looked at her and for a split second I felt it. The old me. The version that would have leaned in and whispered the exact thing that would unravel her on the spot. I knew what it was. I could see the insecurity she was hiding. I could see the fear under the aggression. I could see that her voice was shaking not because she was angry, but because she was losing control of the only thing that made her feel safe in that office. I could have taken her apart in one sentence the way I used to take people apart in 9th grade. I knew the sentence. It formed in my head fully constructed and I could feel it sitting behind my teeth waiting to be released. It would have worked. That's the worst part. It would have dropped her right there in the break room and she wouldn't have recovered from it for weeks. But I'm not that person anymore. I made a choice 10 years ago standing in front of a girl who flinched when I walked toward her, and I've been making that same choice every day since. So instead I said, "Dina, I'm not trying to take anything from you. There's room for both of us to do good work here." She stared at me for a long time. Then she said, "That's exactly what someone trying to take everything would say." She walked out. I stood in the break room holding my coffee and I thought about Alma. I thought about how I used to corner people just like that. I thought about how it felt to be the one with all the power and no conscience. And I thought about how Dina standing in front of me with her jaw tight and her voice shaking wasn't strong. She was terrified. I recognized it because I used to be terrified too. That's why I bullied people. Because I was so afraid of being nothing that I made sure everyone else felt like less. 2 weeks after the break room confrontation, Dina made her biggest mistake. She sent an email to Lorraine claiming that I had mishandled a case file. She said I had failed to follow up with a family and that the case had fallen through the cracks because of my negligence. She framed it as a formal concern. She used words like accountability and liability and duty of care. She CC'd the regional coordinator. She CC'd the head of family services. She wanted it on record. She wanted it to be a paper trail that followed me. I read the email on my phone during my lunch break, and I felt my pulse pick up for the first time since this whole thing started. Not because I was scared, because I recognized the move. This was the kill shot. This was what I would have done at 15. When the smaller tactics stop working, you go for the thing that can't be laughed off. You go for their credibility. You make it professional. You make it documented. You make it so that even if nothing comes of it, there's a stain on the record that people remember. Dina had escalated from social to structural, and she was betting everything on the assumption that I hadn't covered my tracks. The problem was the case she referenced was one I had documented thoroughly. I document everything. I have since college. My professor in social work told us on the first day that the difference between a good caseworker and a fired caseworker is paper. Every phone call logged with dates and times. Every follow-up email saved. Every home visit recorded in the system with notes. I had even flagged the case to Lorraine 2 weeks earlier because the family had relocated and the file needed to be transferred to another district. I had a confirmation email from the receiving office acknowledging the transfer. There was a paper trail already. Mine. And it was airtight. Lorraine pulled both of us into her office the next morning. Dina walked in looking confident. She sat down and folded her hands and started explaining her concerns. She said she had noticed a pattern of incomplete follow-ups from me and that this case was just one example. She said she wasn't trying to cause trouble, but that the families we served deserved better. It was a perfect performance. Measured, concerned, professional. Then Lorraine opened a folder on her desk. She said I pulled the records for this case last night. She read off my notes. Every call, every visit, every email, every flag I'd filed. She read the transfer request I'd submitted 2 weeks before Dina even sent her complaint. Dina's face didn't move at first. It was frozen in that practiced expression of concern, but her eyes changed. They shifted from confident to calculating to panicked in about 4 seconds. Lorraine closed the folder and said the records are complete. There's no gap. She looked at Dina and said, "I also want to address something else. Over the past several weeks, I've received comments from multiple team members about interactions in the office that concern me." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Dina knew exactly what she meant. Lorraine told Dina she was being placed on a performance improvement plan, not for the false report alone, but for a pattern of behavior that multiple people had raised concerns about independently. Lorraine said the office was meant to be a collaborative environment, and that leadership within the team should be supportive, not exclusionary. Dina sat there staring at the desk and didn't say a word. When we walked out of the office, she looked at me and her eyes were red. She said, "You planned this." I said I didn't plan anything. "You sent a false report about my work, and my records disproved it. That's not a plan. That's a consequence." She said, "You turned everyone against me." I said I didn't turn anyone. I treated them with respect. That's all I did. If that turned them against you, then then maybe look at what you were doing differently. Dina didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after that. She came to work and did her job and went home. She didn't make comments. She didn't whisper to people. She didn't send emails about anyone's formatting. She didn't hover near Lorraine's door. She didn't hold court in the break room. She ate lunch alone at her desk with her headphones in and left at exactly 5 every day. The office was quieter in a way that felt unfamiliar, not tense, just still, like a room after a storm passes and nobody quite trusts the sky yet. Willa told me it was the first time in 3 years she didn't feel like she had to watch what she said at work. She said she used to rehearse conversations in her car before coming inside to make sure she didn't say anything Dina could twist. June told me she used to get headaches every Sunday night thinking about coming to work on Monday, and that they had stopped. She said she didn't even realize how bad it was until it wasn't anymore. A woman named Carla from the other side of the office, who I barely knew, stopped me in the hallway and said, "Whatever you did, thank you." I said I didn't do anything. She said, "Exactly. You didn't do anything mean. That was enough." A month later, Dina asked to talk to me. She came to my desk at the end of the day when most people had already left. The office was dim because half the overhead lights were on timers and had already shut off. She pulled up a chair and sat down and looked at her hands for a long time before she said anything. I waited. I didn't prompt her. I didn't make it easy. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I knew from every workshop and every case file and every conversation with every kid I'd ever worked with that the moment someone starts to be honest, it has to come from them. You can't pull it out. You have to let them find it. She said, "I've been thinking about what happened, and I don't think I was wrong about everything, but I know I was wrong about the report." I said, "Okay." She said, "I didn't expect you to be the way you are." I said, "What way?" She said, "Calm. Like nothing I did bothered you. Like you'd seen it all before and you weren't impressed by any of it." I said it bothered me. I just chose not to let it change how I treated people. She was quiet again. Then she said, "I've been the way I am for a long time. At my last job I was the same. The job before that too. I don't know how to be in a room without making sure everyone knows I'm in the room." I looked at her and I saw myself at 15, standing in a hallway making sure everyone moved when I walked, making sure no one forgot I was there, making sure I was never the one who felt small by making everyone else feel smaller. I said, "I understand that more than you know." She looked at me like she didn't believe me. I said, "I used to be the worst bully you've ever met. Worse than anything you've done here. I did things to people that I'll carry for the rest of my life. I changed because someone showed me what my behavior was doing to a girl who wanted to stop being alive because of me. That's what it took. A girl who didn't want to be alive." Dina's face changed. The hardness that was always there cracked just slightly. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "I don't want to be this person." I said, "Then don't be." But saying it isn't enough. You have to actually do the work. Every day. Even when it's easier to go back to what you know. She nodded slowly. She stood up and pushed the chair back and walked toward the door. She stopped before she left and said, "I'm sorry about the report." I said, "I know." She left. Dina didn't become a different person overnight. That's not how it works. I know because it took me years. But she started small. She stopped making comments about people's work in front of others. She started saying good morning to people she used to ignore. She brought coffee for the team one Friday without announcement or expectation. They were small things, but in an office where people had been walking on eggshells for 3 years, small things felt enormous. Willa noticed first. She told me Dina complimented her filing last week and didn't make it backhanded. June said Dina offered to help her with a project and actually followed through. I didn't celebrate any of it out loud. I just watched. Because I know what it looks like when someone is trying to change, and I know how fragile that process is, and I know that the worst thing you can do is turn it into a spectacle. 6 months after I transferred to that office, things were different. Not perfect. Dina and I weren't friends. We probably never would be. But we were colleagues who could sit in the same room without tension leaking into every interaction. The team worked better. People spoke up in meetings. People helped each other without being asked. The hierarchy Dina had built dissolved not because anyone tore it down, but because no one needed it anymore. Lorraine told me during my 6-month review that the office morale had improved significantly and that multiple team members had cited the shift in culture. She asked me what I thought had changed. I said I think people just needed to know it was safe to be themselves here. She nodded and said, "Keep doing what you're doing." I drove home that evening and sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. I thought about Alma and the letter her mother wrote. I thought about the counselor who read it to me and didn't let me look away. I thought about Dina sitting at my desk telling me she didn't know how to be in a room without controlling it. And I thought about the version of me that would have destroyed her without blinking. That version is still in there somewhere. I can feel her when someone pushes me. I can feel her when someone tries to make me small. She doesn't go away. She just doesn't get to drive anymore. The difference between who I was and who I am isn't that the instinct disappeared. It's that I learned there are better things to do with power than break people. I could have broken Dina. I chose not to. And sitting in that car, I realized that choosing not to wasn't weakness. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than any apology. Harder than any workshop or degree or volunteer shift. Because the easiest thing in the world is to hurt someone when you know exactly how. The hardest thing is to know exactly how and decide not to. That's the real playbook. Not the one I wrote in high school. The one I've been writing every day since.